Hi, my name's Bob Zannetti and this is my MGA. It's a twin cam, the holy grail of MGAs, if you like, in so much that they're quite rare. British Motor Corporation, it was then, made 101,081, as it happens, MGAs, but only 2,111 were twin cams. Some of them were coupes and some of them were roadsters like this one, and indeed only 210 were destined for the UK market. The MGA emerged in the 1950s, when they were looking for a replacement for the T-Series MGs. This car, of necessity, was based on the TF chassis, but they found an intriguing way of lowering everything down by putting all the floorboards on the underside of the chassis rather than on top. This enabled them to get this low, sleek profile that gave them good aerodynamics. This particular car I purchased a couple of years ago from the redoubtable Edward Van Dyke, who has a good number of twin cams, and it's a very early car. Indeed, it's number 72, that's the 72nd car ever produced, and bearing in mind that 80% went overseas, it's probably one of the very first UK cars. This particular car was the first one to have specially modified bodywork. Though visually from the exterior it's almost identical, there are changes underneath the skin. Venting of the inner wings for better airflow around the engine. As a result, this car rejoices in a body number 001, as it is indeed the very first twin cam body. I've had the car, as I said, for a couple of years, and in that time I've had one or two issues. I've fettled the car and changed a few things, but basically it is just a very, very original twin cam with the original engine, all numbers matching, as they say, chassis, and everything else is all exactly as it was, including the colour, which is called ash green. It's a now colour, and people now are well enamoured with the colour. Other than that, the car's pretty reliable. It's had its compression ratio lowered from the original 9.9, which was the troublesome compression ratio that required 105 octane fuel, and now the best you can get on the pumps is 98. It seems to run okay on 98, but I do use an octane additive. It's clearly had the piston rings changed during one of the engine rebuilds that it will have had since 1958, and it now runs reliably and well. Slight tendency to oil up plugs, but that's just a question of keeping the plugs clean. The car was introduced in 1958 at Chobham on the Long Cross racing circuit, but I was there last year, which was the 60th anniversary of the introduction of the car. There were 53 twin cams there on that day, which must be close to all that's left in this country, and it was the biggest single collection of twin cams anywhere in the world since the start of them in 1958. As I mentioned earlier, the bodywork on this car is visually very, very similar to the standard MGA. Bearing in mind the radical changes under the bonnet, it's really, to me, quite surprising that they didn't make more visual differences, but that was the thinking of the day, and that's what they did. The things that are obvious are the wheels. These are Dunlop wheels and were developed for specifically Le Mans. In 1955 they had them on the original EXP racing car that was developed to become the MGA, and they also went on the D-type Jaguars. Whilst they may look like they've got normal nuts and bolts holding them on, that is not the case. They are true knockoffs. The spinner comes off, and what looks like wheel nuts are in fact pegs, and they're the same principle that are used today in Formula One. The standard MGAs have started off with drum brakes on all four corners, but did evolve to have disc brakes at the front, but never had them on the back. Of course, the most obvious change from the standard car is that you've got the addition of the words twin cam that sits behind the bonnet vents and across the boot lid. Its strong point is not its petrol consumption, and whilst the figures say that it should do 27 miles to the gallon, closer to 20 is reality. The difference between this and the standard MGA will become quite apparent when you look under the bonnet. The standard MGA has a 1600 pushrod engine, and this is, as the name would suggest, an engine with twin cams. But it is fundamentally the standard A-series BMC engine. But on top went a bespoke and exclusive to this car twin cam aluminium head. The inlet and exhaust cams run underneath these covers, and they're driven by chains that run from the crankshaft in this section here. This section here is the add-on in terms of the over the standard engine, but it's quite remarkable that somehow or other they had left enough room for it. I think it really belies the fact that the car actually started off with the intention of running an engine like this for racing purposes. This being a cross-flow has the carburetors on the starboard side, but of course on the port side you have the exhaust. The problem here, as you can see, is access, which is not good. Adjust the distributor, you say? Where is it? It is deep down here, and you can only follow it by following the wires. This is why this has got slightly different bodywork, because underneath here and behind the front wheels are panels that can be unbolted to give you access. So with the wheels off, the inner panels off, you get some access to things like the distributor, the dynamo and the starter, all of which are buried down this side. These access panels are on both sides for the reasons that you need to get to the exhaust and distributor this side, and the starter and the dynamo on this side. The seats are specific to these cars in that they've got bolsters that go around the front with the ribbed part only in the centre. The steering wheel is non-standard. I still have the standard steering wheel, but it's quite large, so I've changed it for a slightly smaller steering wheel simply to enable me to get in and out without too many problems. The boot is pretty well standard, slightly less room than on the standard car because of the slightly bigger wheels. It runs with I have in there a full Dunlop wheel and tyre, and it does use quite a lot of the space.